as sacred writings, both completing and eclipsing the Old Testament of Christianity's Jewish roots, collectively known as the books in Greek. The Bible would arguably become the most significant book in global history, and its deity, the God of Western cultures. God's body is nowhere denied in the Bible. It is simply assumed, whether or not mortals were privileged enough to catch a glimpse of it. And according to biblical texts, many were. Following their exodus from Egypt, a committee of Israelite elders had ascended Mount Sinai and seen first God's feet, then the deity himself. Among them, of course, was Moses, who is said to have enjoyed regular meetings with God, talking to him face to face, as one would speak to a friend. Moses is not the only one claimed to have experienced God's physical presence. In Genesis, Abraham walks alongside him, and Jacob has a wrestling match with him. In the books bearing their names, the prophets Isaiah and Ezekiel each see God sitting on his throne, while Amos sees him standing in one of his temples. In the Gospels, Jesus not only boasts he has seen God, but is also said to have seated himself alongside God in the heavens as his right hand. It is a companionable pairing reputedly witnessed by members of the Jesus movement, including a talkative young man called Stephen in the book of Acts, and the enraptured, if terrified, writer of Revelation known as John of Patmos, both of whom see God sitting enthroned in the heavens, with Christ seated or standing next to him. In all these biblical stories, and many more besides, it was simply a given that God had a body. The sensational aspect in their telling was that God had allowed people to see it, such a rare privilege that during the Second Temple period, God was increasingly understood to have long hidden his body from the world, rendering it unseeable and hence invisible to most mortals. But an unseen body is not the same as a non-existent body. Underpinning the hiddenness of God was a religious regulation which had crept its way into earlier versions of the Ten Commandments in the Second Temple period. You shall not make for yourself a carved image, whether in the likeness of what is in the heaven above, or what is on the earth below, or what is in the waters beneath the earth. It is a striking insertion, for it suggests that material images of God were once a normative feature of Israelite and Judaite religion. Otherwise, there would be no need for the ban, and in this, Israel and Judah were no different from their neighbors, for alongside other sacred objects, statues and figurines of deities had long played a part in Southwest Asian religions. It was well understood that the gods were usually unobservable in their natural heavenly habitat, but they might deign to reveal themselves in the earthly realm as material images in a cult place, a place of worship. More than a symbol or representation, a cult image was a material manifestation of divine presence. The statue was not only identified with the deity, but was the deity. It was also too easy to dismiss this as a characteristic of unsophisticated or primitive religious cultures. But this is to misunderstand the people of the past and their gods. This was a world in which perceptions of reality were neither limited nor defined by the physical, but stretched along a continuum from the natural to the supranatural. The cosmic membrane separating the earthly from the otherworldly was highly porous and malleable, so that divinity in all its myriad forms could break through into the world of humans, whether it was perceived as a strange scent in the wind or a fleeting shape glimpsed from the corner of the eye, or felt at a powerful place in the landscape. But divinity at its most tangible when materialized in images of the gods. It was by means of cooperation between deities and worshippers, facilitated by ritual experts, that the earthly substance of the statue was transformed into a different category of being. As ritual specialists in Mesopotamia had put it, the divine statue was born in heaven and made on earth. As extraordinary beings, deities were unconstrained. They could remain unseen and at a distance in the heavens, while simultaneously revealing themselves as stars in the sky, statues in temples, figures in the home, or unseen but perceptible forces permeating the earthly realm. Would you like to go?
If you want me to.
The biblical ban on divine images is often held to signal the incorporeal nature of God, marking him as a deity distinct from any other in the ancient world, a deity impossible to craft in clay or metal, wood or stone, by virtue of being bodiless. But the Bible's promotion of imageless worship indicates no such thing. The cults of various Egyptian, Assyrian, Babylonian, and Phoenician deities all experience periods of aniconic worship, despite the fact that these deities were understood to have bodies. The prohibition of divine images in the Ten Commandments points instead to a growing emphasis on the hiddenness of God's body, as a closely related tradition in Deuteronomy indicates. Here, Moses reminds the Israelites of their encounter with God on their way to the Promised Land, when they had gathered at the foot of the holy mountains in the wilderness to listen, as the deity spelled out the terms of the covenant. Having descended into the mountaintop, God himself was veiled from view, for all the Israelites could see was the heavenly fire and dark cosmic cloud shrouding the mountain's peak. Since you saw no form when Yahweh spoke to you from the middle of the fire, Moses says, watch yourselves very closely, lest you act corruptly by making a carved image for yourselves. In this text, the imageless worship of God was to be preferred to creating a statue of a deity the Israelites hadn't actually seen, but had only heard speaking. The emerging theological emphasis on the hiddenness of God would eventually give rise to the abstract, incorporeal deity of Judaism and Christianity, a deity no longer shrouded by fire and clouds, but only wondrous, inscrutable mystery. But Judaism and Christianity are post-biblical religions, and their disembodied deity is a later reimagining of a God who was far from enigmatic. For the God of the Bible was a deity who not only had a body, but had a personal name, a backstory, a family, and a host of companions in the heavens. God's real name is Yahweh or Yahu, or perhaps just Yah. It is impossible to know for sure because the original Hebrew-speaking devotees of this god used a writing system comprising only consonants, much like modern Hebrew and Arabic today. And so in ancient inscriptions, the deity's name appears only as YHW, YH, or YHWH, leaving us uncertain as to how it was vocalized. In the longer form, YHWH, that is more commonly found in the ancient Hebrew literature of the Bible, but although many of these texts would be read aloud in worship, it remains difficult to know how the name was pronounced, for by the 3rd century BCE, when this deity had already been venerated for centuries, it had become unmutterable, a name too dangerous and powerful for human mouths to articulate. But later scholars in the Greco-Roman world would have no such scruples. They appear to have vocalized it as Yahweh or Yahweh, and so Yahweh is the name by which this deity has come to be known. Given the thoroughgoing theological revision of the literature, which now forms the Hebrew Bible, Yahweh is often assumed to have been a distinctly solitary deity, devoid of divine colleagues and a family. But the religious realities of his early history were very different. As one of many deities in the late Bronze and early Iron Age Levant, Yahweh was originally a god rooted within a polytheistic world, and remained comfortably so for much of his early career. This was a world in which the gods were imagined as a sprawling heavenly household, broadly reflecting the family bonds and social structures of their human worshippers. In most Levantine societies, this pantheon was headed by the aged progenitor of the cosmos, the god El, or in some dialects, a name functioning both as a proper noun and the genetic Semitic term for deity. Beneath him were ranked a younger generation of gods, each charged with a particular portfolio in the management of the universe, from storms, seas, sunlight, and starlight, to fertility, birth, warfare, and death. As frontline deities, these were the most prominent gods of ancient Levantine societies, and those most closely tied to the political and territorial identities of their worshippers. Thanks particularly to a wealth of literature dated to the 14th and 13th centuries BCE, recovered from the remains of an ancient city-state called Ugarit on the Syrian coast, El's multi-tiered household has come into sharper focus. He was understood to be the gentle father of the gods, enjoying a comfortable semi-retirement from the day-to-day running of the cosmos, accompanied by his consort, the mother goddess Atharat. Between them, they had 70 sons, a collective term for the frontline deities. These included Ugarit's special patron, the powerful storm god Baal, and his sister Anat. a fearsome warrior, as well as the boisterous sea god Yam, and the underworld king of death, Mot, each of whom dwelt in his own domain, located at the very edge of the divine realm. Ranked between them were the relatively minor deities of practical skills and cultural arts, including architecture and design, healing, music, and magic, while below them was a collection of divine attendants and messengers who variously served the gods and commuted between the heavens and the earthly realm. Despite their differences in rank, the gods met together as a divine council or assembly, chaired by El in his role as the highest god, to decide on matters both divine and mortal. Ugarit's pantheon was typical of Levantine religions in the late 2nd and early 1st millennium BCE, when early forms of Yahweh worship emerged. The pantheon's shape and composition was determined by the very human idea that to be a god, isolated from any other, was to be bereft of the benefits of collaboration, status, and kinship. In short, it was to be socially impotent and frankly useless. Therefore, to mortals against this cultural backdrop, certain theological claims asserting that Yahweh had only ever been a solitary deity look more than a little implausible, and the Bible itself reveals that this God was far from alone. A fragment of ancient poetry in the book of Deuteronomy only locates Yahweh within a pantheon, but also reveals exactly who his father was. It describes the separation of humans into distinct groups, people, or nations, and explains why each group was allocated a particular deity to act as its special patron. But the deity supervising this division of divine labor is not Yahweh, but Elyon, a title of El reflecting his role as the Most High God of the pantheon. When Elyon, the Most High, apportioned the nations, when he divided humankind, he fixed the boundaries of the peoples according to the number of the divine sons. For Yahweh's portion was his people, Jacob his allotted share. Here Yahweh appears as just one among El's many divine children. Other ancient pieces of poetry in the Hebrew Bible tell us something of Yahweh's early career. They too employ mythic motifs that run against the theological preferences of later biblical writers and editors, suggesting that they reflect older traditions about the earliest history of the biblical God. Far from portraying Yahweh as the supreme king and creator of the cosmos, they present him